So how could a heart have developed by evolutionary processes?
There is evidence that the heart evolved. Selective pressures drive evolution via natural selection. Some phenotypes are more favorable than others, depending on external conditions. A phenotype is a particular way that genes are expressed in the physical traits or characteristics of an organism. These can be tested and demonstrated across populations of different species. Types of selection pressures include resources like sufficient food, habitat, shelter, territory, and mates. Environmental conditions like temperature, weather conditions, or geographical access. And biological factors like predators and diseases. As organisms evolved from single cells using diffusion, the need for a better way to deliver nutrients to more and more cells and organs made of many cells was a biological pressure put on the organisms to evolve systems that were selected for that better delivered nutrients to the cells.
And this may explain why Fuxianhuia is the earliest animal known to have a blood circulatory system, as well as an organ to keep its blood moving, the first known traces of a very early heart.
Oh, Fuxianhuia. So you found a fossil that you think is 500 million years old, and what? It has a circulatory system? It has a heart? Okay, so that doesn't tell me how a heart evolved.
The 500-million-year-old fossil has the first traces of an early heart and circulatory system that's been found so far. That is an example of the oldest fossil found with preserved soft tissue in it. That's it. Perhaps you should try paying attention to the video you are reviewing.
Now, the path that connects this ancient predator to you isn't a short, straight line. It's long, with lots of sidetracks that lead to other, more familiar organisms that also have hearts. It includes animals like slugs and snails, and insects and crustaceans, and the first vertebrates to walk on four legs. It took hundreds of millions of years and countless different iterations of the same basic structure to lead to the heart that you have today.
Oh, so you're telling me that we find more organisms that have hearts. Okay, where's the evidence that a heart developed by natural processes?
It was clearly stated that it took hundreds of millions of years and countless iterations from a basic structure that led to the heart we have today. That's evolving by evolutionary processes driven by pressures and selected for. It was also stated it's not in a short, straight line, and yet that is what Bread keeps asking for due to the extreme cognitive dissonance, also known as fingers in your ears, imposed by a belief in creationism that denies reality and every field of science in favor of it's magic. Go home, scientists. No point in studying the natural world. Creationists have it all figured out. It's magic.
In order to understand where hearts came from, we have to go back to the earliest common ancestor of everything that has a heart. Now, we don't have a fossil of that ancestor, but we do have some proof of its existence. It's genes. We, and everything else that has a heart, carry some of the same genes that this organism had. Those genes are responsible for developing blood vessels that can contract to push blood around. And over time, an incredibly diverse group of animals has used this basic set of instructions to arrive at different solutions for circulating blood.
Oh, okay. So we know that there was a common ancestor that had some of the genes to make a heart. And how do we know that? Because all organisms who have a heart have some shared genes. That is not evidence that a heart evolved, though. That is just an observation that we make about what is. So it could be just as much evidence that a common designer used some similar genes to make organisms that have different hearts. So I'm still waiting for evidence that a heart could develop by natural processes.
Cognitive dissonance is strong with the Bread. It was clearly stated in this video Bread is reviewing that Bread doesn't listen to, that there is evidence for heart evolution in our genes, that we share the same genes with an early common ancestor that were used to make blood vessels contract. These genes, through evolutionary processes driven by biological pressures and selected for, evolved over time to become the first early hearts, like the one in the 500 million year old fossil shown a moment or two ago in this video. I do not think Bread is paying any attention at all.
Now, not all animals today have what we'd call a true heart, but some version of an organ for circulating blood has evolved in at least 3 major groups: the arthropods, the mollusks, and us vertebrates.
Now you're telling me that not only one time did a heart develop by natural processes, but now I'm supposed to believe that 3 different times a heart developed by natural processes? Wow, this is starting to become extremely implausible. Okay, so throughout the entire video, I still don't see any evidence of the development of a heart.
You haven't paid any attention to the video. Intentionally, I think, as that's the cognitive dissonance of creationists, as there has been plenty of evidence provided for the evolution of the heart in just these few clips. What was just stated is different organs developed in at least 3 major groups that evolved from earlier forms, that evolved different versions of an organ to pump nutrients to the cells, because there is no design. There is what works for each organism differently. No scientists in evolutionary biology ever claimed that one heart evolved, then another evolved into other types of hearts. Evolution changes over generations, over populations, over time.
Well, what about if I look at some papers online? Well, there's quite a few papers that have been written on possible paths for the development of a heart, but these are extremely speculative. The truth is that we do not have evidence that hearts evolved.
What if you looked at some papers out of many online? Probably a waste of time, because you will not accept any type of evidence provided in any of the many scientific papers on the evolution of the heart. Plenty of evidence has been presented in the video you are reviewing, but not paying any attention to any of it at all is not going to educate you on heart evolution, and neither is looking at some scientific papers on heart evolution.
What we can show you is what is now and what used to be in the past. And every time we find that organisms that have a circulatory system have a functioning circulatory system. So where's the gradual process by which organs could take the time to develop over millions of years with mutation after mutation that happened to come together in a coordinated way to form not just a heart, because a heart by itself doesn't do any good.
Oh no, Bread just went there. This is the same question asked of Richard Dawkins that's published as the stupidest question Dawkins was ever asked.
As a creationist or believer in creation, the book of Genesis, I would disagree with that. But
what would you disagree with?
With the time.
How old do you think the world is then?
I would say that because I'm a Bible-believing
Yes.
Christian, that I believe that the book of Genesis is in actual fact the record, because Christ as well referred often to the book of Genesis, that in the beginning,
Yes.
Adam and Eve, and I know that. But before we get onto that, say just as a layman, I had to come to terms with, how on earth did we function? And the heart, for example, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, and particularly, don't want to be too personal, but how do I take a leak if I have to wait a few million years to do that?
Wait a minute, I don't understand.
Well, if I was to go to the toilet,
Yes.
how did we evolve with the ability to release waste if we were waiting for certain organs to develop?
Well, no, it's not really like that.
I know it's a simple question, but I'm a simple man.
Now there's a couple of different systems that hearts can use. There's an open system and there's a closed system, and there's the chambered heart, and there's different types of different hearts with different numbers of chambers. So not every system works the same.
That's quite a list of all the evolutionary lines that evolved hearts you just rattled off. I don't think you have any clue what you just said, but you did point out all the different methods different species have arrived at differently to get nutrients to cells using evolutionary pressures that are selected for. May Bigfoot give me the strength to go on. Organisms do not wait to develop organs. They are born with what they are born with. In species like us, that includes a heart and a bladder. Blood types like AB evolved around the 1600s ACE. AB did not exist. Then evolution. Then it did exist. And yet, humans survived before then and since then while a new blood type evolved, and it may happen again and again in the future. Wow. When I thought the bread couldn't get any moldier, it did.
It's time to start separating fact from fiction.
Let's indeed separate fact from fiction. Creationism is a grift pushed on the uneducated and those who embrace cognitive dissonance as a worldview. The evolution of the heart can be, and has been, demonstrated in many ways, and was in these video clips, but the bread didn't pay any attention to any of it. I will point out just one example of heart evolution, as that is all that it takes to disprove bread's claim there is no evidence for hearts evolving. Humans are evolved fish. All vertebrates share a common fish ancestor. Our fish ancestors had a 2-chambered heart. Humans have a 4-chambered heart. Therefore, human hearts evolved from a 2-chambered heart in our ancestors to a 4-chambered heart we humans have today. The evidence that we are evolved fish with a 4-chambered heart rather than a 2-chambered one is overwhelming. I will give some examples that prove our fish ancestors and proves we are evolved fish and we evolved a 4-chambered heart from a 2-chambered one in our fish ancestors. The philtrum is the groove on your top lip that lies just beneath your nose. You see it every day in the mirror, so you probably never think about it. It has no obvious function. Instead, it is an accident of our origins, a clue to our fishy past and how our faces first formed. Your face is formed in the womb in the first couple of months of life. From when you were the size of a grain of rice to when you were the size of a kidney bean. In the womb, the human face is actually formed of 3 main sections which rotate and come together in an unborn fetus. The way this happens only really makes sense when you realize that, strange though it may sound, we are actually descended from fish. The early human embryo looks very similar to the embryo of any other mammal, bird, or amphibian, all of which have evolved from fish. Your eyes start out on the sides of your head, but then move to the middle. The top lip, along with the jaw and palate, started life as gill-like structures on your neck. Your nostrils and the middle part of your lip come down from the top of your head. There is no trace of a scar. The plates of tissue and muscle fuse seamlessly. But there is, however, a little remnant of all this activity in the middle of your top lip, your philtrum. This whole process, the bits coming together of the various elements to produce a recognizable human face, requires great precision. To fuse correctly, the 3 sections must grow and meet at precisely the right time in the womb. If the timing is out by as little as an hour, the baby may grow up with a cleft lip or cleft lip and palate, which can be extremely disfiguring. Around the world, 1 in 700 babies are born with clefts. There are other odd things about human anatomy that can only really be explained by our fishy ancestry. Sharks, like other fish, have their reproductive organs in their chests. For example, if you were to cut up a shark, you would discover that its gonads are lodged up in its chest, behind its liver. Like the shark, our gonads also start life high up near the liver, but unlike the shark, they need to descend. In a woman, they descend and become the ovaries, located conveniently near the uterus and the fallopian tubes. In men, they become the testes, but to get down and fill the scrotum, they have to make a far longer and more torturous journey south. One consequence of this journey is the creation of a weakening in the abdominal wall, and as a result, men are far more prone than women to what are known as inguinal hernias. An inguinal hernia can appear as a lump in the groin and may be painful. The lump normally disappears if you lie down. The lump is actually the contents of your gut protruding through that weakness in the muscle wall left behind by the descent of the testes. Inguinal hernias often require surgery, and if you are unfortunate enough to get one, blame it on fish. A hiccup is caused by a spasm of the diaphragm, a big muscle in the chest, followed by an involuntary gulp. Both these actions have watery roots. In fish, the nerves that activate breathing take a short journey from an ancient part of the brain stem, to the throat and gills. In humans, it is more complicated. To breathe properly, our brain stem has to send messages not just to the throat, but down to the chest and diaphragm. This complex arrangement means that the nerves are prone to spasm, which can initiate hiccups. Once a hiccup is started, it is kept going by a simple motor reflex that we seem to have inherited from an amphibian ancestor. For the ancient tadpole, the nerve controlling this reflex served a useful purpose, allowing the entrance to the lung to remain open when breathing air, but closing it off when gulping water, which would then be directed only to the gills. For humans and other mammals who hiccup, it has no value, but does provide another bit of evidence of our common ancestry. The recurrent laryngeal nerve, also known as the inferior laryngeal nerve, is a branch of the vagus nerve, which has a characteristic loop around the right subclavian artery on the right and the aortic arch on the left before returning up to ascend to the larynx. In fish, this is a short route from brain to larynx, but in species like humans, the route is extended from the brain to the larynx, down through the chest, around parts of the heart, and then back up to the larynx. And in species like giraffes, this journey can be around 4.3 meters in length. That can only be explained because of evolution. As the heart moved downward in the chest, the laryngeal nerve went with it, extending it and making a long, unnecessary journey no designer would have done. The nerve goes to the larynx from the brain. No need to drop down in the chest unless it had to accommodate the organs moving down in the chest as fish evolved into other species that evolved into mammals like giraffes and humans. In summation, is there evidence the heart evolved? Yes. Humans are evolved fish. Humans have a 4-chambered heart, while our fish ancestors had 2-chambered hearts. Selected for by biological pressures to evolve better means to transport nutrients to needed areas of the body. The evidence for our fish ancestry is genetic, morphological, physiological, and dates for the species found as fossils are dated via dating methods that are extremely accurate and cross-checked to confirm the accuracy. In dating things like the earliest known fossil of an early heart to around 500 million years ago, as well as intermediate fossilized species that are also dated, showing the progression through species sharing a common ancestor with shared genes that could make blood vessels contract, that evolved later to be the first early hearts, that later evolved to two-chambered hearts in fish, that later evolved to four-chambered hearts in humans, aka evolved bipedal, air-breathing, four-chambered heart fish. Thanks for watching. Don't let your bread get moldy.
Evolution.
What an amazing story. I'm sure there has to be evidence for that.
To tell me how a complex organ like a heart could have possibly evolved, but that's the story that you're being asked to believe. Do you really believe that?